The former U.S. attorney who gave Jeffrey Epstein that controversial sweetheart plea deal back in 2008 was on Capitol Hill tonight. Alex Acosta is his name. You may remember him also because he worked in the first Trump administration as the labor secretary for a while. He just finished up his closed-door testimony before the House Oversight Committee.
I've testified for 6 hours. I'll let the record speak for itself.
Okay, well, just to remind everybody, why is Alex Acosta important here? Well, because of that plea deal that he made, Epstein served only 13 months in a county jail when he had to register as a sex offender. He was allowed to leave almost every day for 12 hours a day. And it is important to emphasize that when you think about the context here of what he had done, to think about the abuse that such a deal could have knowingly allowed even while he was, quote unquote, serving his time. And that deal also gave Epstein and any potential co-conspirators immunity from further federal prosecution, which is pretty incredible because at the time, they had a lot of evidence and a lot of other names of potential victims, evidence that Epstein had sexually abused other teenage girls. So to give him immunity from anybody coming with other claims is stunning. Still, Acosta stood by his decision over the years.
There was value to getting a guilty plea. You can always look at a play after the fact and say, should it have been the safe play or should you have gone for the big score?
And there's also do the right thing. Well, Trump stood by his side, too, even on the day Acosta was forced to resign from Trump's first administration when he was labor secretary, as I mentioned. The reason that he had to resign was because of growing questions about his role in that Epstein plea deal. At the time, Trump said this.
He made a deal that people were happy with, and then 12 years later, they're not happy with it. You'll have to figure all of that out. But the fact is, he has been a fantastic Secretary of Labor.
A Justice Department investigation later found that Acosta actually allowed that plea deal to happen while the FBI and Acosta's prosecutors were actually still investigating the case and identifying new victims. So they did a deal before they even knew the extent of any allegations. The report notes, and I quote, the government did not know the full scope of Epstein's conduct, whether, given Epstein's other domestic and foreign residences, his criminal conduct had occurred in other locations, or whether the additional victims might implicate other offenders. That's really crucial, right? That's the whether it could implicate other men or co-conspirators. And the report then concluded that Acosta exercised poor judgment. Out front now, someone who was inside that closed-door Acosta testimony today, the Democratic Congressman James Walkinshaw, who sits on the House Oversight Committee. I appreciate your time very much, sir. What did you learn from Acosta's testimony today?
Well, I think we learned what we've seen from Donald Trump and his allies throughout this Epstein saga, which is, in my view, a very callous disregard for the victims, the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, and I think Alex Acosta is in that category. The idea that Jeffrey Epstein, after the heinous crimes he committed, could receive an 18-month sentence, serve only 13 months, be released on a daily basis to continue his crimes, and then be released fully to commit more crimes is outrageous. It shouldn't happen in the United States of America. And the idea that Donald Trump then selected Alex Acosta to be his Secretary of Labor is also outrageous and raises a lot more questions.
So did you get a chance to ask today any of the questions as to what the motive would have been? And I know there's a lot of speculation out there. Some have tried to explain why such a seemingly insane deal would have been made. Did you get any answers as to the why that you felt were legitimate?
No answers that I felt were legitimate. He said essentially the same thing he has said publicly, that he didn't have confidence that there was a strong enough case to get a stronger conviction and longer sentence. Quite frankly, I don't buy it. He struck me as somebody who really didn't fully believe or trust the victims that he was hearing from. One of the things that deeply disturbed me is that when he was asked about Jeffrey Epstein committing more crimes, including rape, after his release, Mr. Acosta's response was a legalistic one. Essentially, those assertions, those allegations hadn't been proven in a court of law, so he wasn't going to accept them, despite what we have heard even recently from the survivors.
You know, according to chairman of your committee, Mr. Comer, Acosta also said today that he never saw President Donald Trump's name on any document related to Epstein. Of course, we do know that the Department of Justice has informed Trump that his name is in the files more than once. We know that to be the case. We know that he was told about that. But Comer says that Acosta said he never saw President Trump's name in the files. So do you believe that?
I think when the transcripts are released and reviewed, the most common phrase from Alex Acosta today was, "I don't recall." And a lot of the questions about Donald Trump, he responded with, "I don't recall." So I think there's a lot more that we need to learn. And look, to Chairman Comer, there's an easy solution to this. If what you and Alex Acosta are saying are true in that respect, then release the files.
Right.
Chairman Comer could go to the floor of the House and sign the discharge petition. We could take a vote to release the files. Why doesn't he do that?
I really appreciate your time, Congressman. Thank you very much. I think one of the interesting what he just
Thanks
said
for
there,
having me.
the words that when the transcripts come out that he believe will be the most used words by Alex Acosta today will be, "I don't recall," which says so much. Out front now, Danielle Bensky, one of the Epstein survivors who shared her story at the Capitol. She was first recruited back in 2004 at the age of 17 to give Epstein a massage at his townhouse on New York's Upper East Side. Now, at the time, Danielle was struggling to make ends meet. She was an aspiring ballerina in New York City, and she joins me here tonight in her first one-on-one television interview. And Danielle, I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.
As you've chosen to put yourself out there and tell this story. So this was an incredibly difficult time in your life. You were an aspiring ballerina in New York City, right? And going for it as big as you possibly could. And your mother gets diagnosed with a brain tumor.
Yeah.
This is the context in which you meet Jeffrey Epstein. What happened?
Yeah, so I had met him a little bit prior to that, and there was really a systematic breaking down that happened that now that I look at it, there was quite a bit of manipulation that happened leading into that moment where I did bring him the brain scans. And in that moment, that was when the abuse really ramped up. And he said, "What will you do for this? What will you do for me?" And
to get help for your mother,
yeah,
essentially. What will
really,
you do for me?
Exactly, yeah. And it really felt like a dire situation in my life. So he said, "You can either recruit more girls or you're going to have to do something for me." And I didn't recruit anybody. I didn't want to recruit anybody. I was not, ever even going to tell anybody about what was happening to me. I was so ashamed of it. But the manipulation held me there for so long. And so, yeah.
Because you thought basically, if I allow him to rape me, if this happens,
yeah.
I could help my mother.
That's true, yeah. And he also, there were so many things leading up to this that he was trying to find the way in with me. He would always talk about, "I know ballet masters, I have studio space, and couldn't really find the way in until I gave him the brain scans. And I thought that he had made all of this money through the medical profession. And it turns out, of course, that is untrue. But at that moment, I did feel that was where it was coming from. So I did bring him the brain scans, and the abuse revved up, and then he knew he had me, so yeah.
How long did it go on for, Danielle?
About a year, yeah. So I was 17 to 18. Yeah, it was not great.
So as you sit here tonight and you talk about this as a victim and as a survivor,
yeah.
When you hear what the Congressman just said, that the words used the most today by Alex Acosta, who did that deal with Epstein in 2007, where "I don't recall," you were sitting here next to me while we were doing that interview, and I saw you reacting. How do you respond to that?
I think that, unfortunately, I think survivors are quite used to that. We're getting that a lot from politicians that are, "I don't recall that this happened, I can't." And it is really turning a blind eye to survivors. And I think there has been a systemic breaking down where I feel that, we sat at the House Oversight Committee. I was part of that. I was in that room, which was very special to be a part of because it did feel nonpartisan in that moment. But as we sat there, we listened to each other's stories in chronological order. And it started with Maria Farmer's story in 1996. In 1996, I was 10 years old. And she's not the oldest victim, actually. We now know Jess Michaels came forward and her abuse began in 1990. I was 5, So when you look at starting with Maria's story in 1996, and you work your way down the table, you start to see the breadth of this, and it's absolutely appalling that the justice system has failed us time and time again. And we ended up talking about Acosta in 2008, and there was a victim who sat there at the House Oversight Committee and spoke of Epstein. She's also not the only one who mentioned this. Epstein was in an ankle monitor on work release with the police at the door. And
This is that 12, yeah.
and she was being abused. And so
So while he's on that, allowed to be out, he was abusing
and that's
raping
on
girls.
record, and that was in front of the entire House Oversight Committee. So when we hear these words like, we're not credible, or that it's a hoax, all of these things, it is so personal to survivors, and it is so nonpartisan. And so to hear more of the same sort of rhetoric, the same sort of, I can't recall, I don't know, dig deep, because I promise you survivors recall.